5 seats. 5 excuses.
It's just a signature. Arthur would want you to.
Don't touch his name with your mouth. Family steps up. You will sign.
No more running.
A gift like that, people may assume what you gave in return.
Assume smaller.
Your mind will fit.
You will not turn your back on us.
Watch me. From now on, talk to my lawyer.
It's family, Chloe, just a rounding error.
The safety net is gone.
I'm Chloe. And in the Sterling family, there were 2 kinds of kids, the golden child and the one who had to figure it all out on her own. After busting my ass for 4 years to graduate from Harvard with honors, this was supposed to be the moment they finally saw me, the moment they were finally proud. But as I looked out at the crowd, the 5 seats I'd saved for them were empty. My dad's text message later said it all. Sorry, kid, Kyle's golf tournament ran long. Standing there, the loneliness was crushing, a cold, hard confirmation that I would always come in second. But they had no idea I was building a secret, a $1.8 billion secret, and at our annual family dinner, I was about to serve it to them. If you've ever felt like the underdog, let me know where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe, because you will not want to miss this. After the hollow echo of my graduation, I did what I always did. I buried myself in work. I'd turned down a 6-figure job offer at my father's company, a decision that earned me confused stares and a lecture from my mother about throwing away my potential. Instead, I took an entry-level position at a struggling tech startup called Innovate Tech. To my family, it sounded like I'd joined a cult for broke nerds. My brother Kyle loved to joke about it. He'd say things like, "Still playing with computers in that little garage, Chloe?" The irony was, our office actually was a converted garage in Palo Alto. It smelled perpetually of stale coffee and panicked ambition. But to me, it smelled like freedom. The world of my family was built on inherited wealth, on appearances, on who you knew. At Innovate Tech, none of that mattered. Your last name didn't get you a promotion. Your designer suit didn't make your code run faster. All that mattered was what you could build. What problems could you solve? And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in a place where I truly belonged. I wasn't David Sterling's responsible daughter or Kyle Sterling's overachieving sister. I was just Chloe. The girl who could spot a flaw in an algorithm from a mile away. The girl who stayed until 3 a.m, fueled by cheap pizza and a relentless drive to make something work. Work became my sanctuary, my refuge, a place where my value wasn't up for debate. It was proven, every single day, in lines of code and successful product launches. While my family was busy comparing country club memberships, I was busy building a career. My days were a blur of 18-hour work sessions. I learned to live on 3 hours of sleep and the adrenaline of a looming deadline. I rose through the ranks quickly, first to the product manager, then to the director of product development. I was leading teams, managing multi-million-dollar projects, and making decisions that shaped the future of the company. My colleagues respected me. They saw my work ethic, my commitment. They saw what my family never bothered to look for. It was during a particularly brutal quarter, when our funding was running low and morale was in the gutter, that Arthur Vance was brought in as a company advisor. He was a legend in Silicon Valley. A 65-year-old veteran entrepreneur who had founded 3 unicorn startups from scratch. He was brilliant, kind, and completely unimpressed by status symbols despite being enormously wealthy. He drove a 10-year-old Toyota and wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation. He reminded me that true wealth is invisible. One afternoon, after a tense board meeting where I had challenged the CEO's strategy, Arthur asked me to walk with him to get coffee. We ended up talking for 3 hours. He didn't ask about my family or my background. He asked about my ideas. He listened. really listened. At the end of our conversation, he looked at me with this intense clarity and said something that changed my life. He said, "You don't think like everyone else in that room, Chloe. You see the things they miss." From that day on, he became my mentor. While my father had taught me about business in theory, Arthur showed me its practical application in the real world. He taught me about risk, about resilience, and most importantly, about integrity. He saw the fire in me that my family had always tried to extinguish, and instead of smothering it, he fanned the flames. 2 years later, Innovate Tech was acquired by a tech giant. The buyout was massive. My stock options, which my family thought were worthless paper, suddenly made me a multimillionaire overnight. And this is where the secret began. My weapon. I told my family I'd made a nice little profit. They had enough for a down payment on a small condo, maybe. Something respectable. They had no idea. I took my entire buyout, every single cent, and poured it into my own company. I called it Vance Dynamics, in honor of Arthur. He was my first investor, putting in $500,000 on a handshake. He said he was investing in me, not the idea. On my 27th birthday, after a brutal year of getting Vance Dynamics off the ground, Arthur gave me a small, unassuming box. Inside was his watch. It wasn't flashy. It was elegant in its simplicity. An original he had designed himself before he ever became known for tech. I knew from articles I'd read about him that it was rare, but I had no idea of its true value. He fastened it around my wrist. He said, "This has been with me through $3 billion companies. Now it should be with you. Wear it to remember what you're worth, not what others think you're worth." My family thought I was running some kind of tech blog or a cute little online business. They'd ask about it at holidays with a condescending pat on the arm. "Still tinkering with that website of yours, dear?" my mother would ask. I'd just smile and nod. "It's going well, thanks." I let them believe what they wanted. I let them keep their image of me as the quiet, struggling daughter who just wasn't as ambitious as her brother. I let them underestimate me. Because their ignorance was my advantage. It was my shield. While they were living in their world of inherited assumptions, I was in the real world, building an empire. And my silent success, this massive, growing secret, that was my ace in the hole. 3 months after Arthur gave me his watch, he passed away. It was sudden, a massive heart attack. One day, he was in my office laughing about a terrible pitch deck we'd just seen, and the next, he was gone. The grief was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating weight that settled deep in my chest. He wasn't just my mentor. He was the closest thing I'd ever had to a father figure who actually saw me. The watch on my wrist became more than just a beautiful object. It was my last tangible connection to him. A constant reminder of his belief in me. I was navigating the company through a critical growth phase, trying to honor his legacy while my own world felt like it had crumbled. I was vulnerable, more vulnerable than I had been in years. And of course, that's when my family decided to strike. It started subtly. Little things that, on their own, seemed innocent enough. But strung together, they formed a pattern. A cold, unsettling premonition that something was wrong. My mother, who usually only called to remind me of someone's birthday or to critique my latest social media post, started calling me almost daily. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with a concern that felt completely artificial. She'd ask, "Chloe, honey, how are you holding up? Really? And how's that little company of yours doing? Is the income steady? You're still in that small apartment, right?" Each question was a probe, a little reconnaissance mission disguised as motherly love. She wasn't asking how I was. She was assessing my financial stability. Then came the email from my father. My dad wasn't an email person. He communicated in brief, transactional phone calls. But one Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Checking in." It was short, unnervingly casual. It read, "Heard your company is still afloat. Good. Let me know if you need any real financial advice. Your father, David." Still afloat. The condescension was practically dripping from the screen. He wasn't offering help. He was reminding me of my perceived place in the world. The struggling entrepreneur playing at business, while he and my brother operated in the real world of finance and inherited wealth. My stomach twisted into a knot. I could feel it in my gut. That deep, primal instinct that tells you when you're being hunted. They were circling. They never showed this much interest unless they wanted something. Usually, it was something small. A last-minute loan for Kyle to cover a gambling debt he'd lied about, or pressure on me to give up my holiday plans because Kyle had spontaneously decided to go to Aspen, and the family had to be together. But this felt different. This felt bigger. The air was thick with a calculated sweetness that preceded a storm. A trap was being set. And I was walking right into the middle of it. The final act came exactly 1 week after Arthur's funeral. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at a wall, feeling the profound emptiness of his absence, when my phone buzzed with a FaceTime request. It was from my mom. I almost declined, but a part of me knew I needed to face whatever this was head-on. When I answered, my screen was filled with 3 faces. My mother, my father, and my brother Kyle, all gathered in my father's study. They looked like a tribunal, ready to pass judgment. It began with a performance of sympathy. My mother's face was a mask of practiced sorrow. "Chloe, darling, we were just talking about how terribly sad we are about Arthur. Such a loss. We know how much he meant to you." My father nodded grimly. Kyle looked bored. He was just waiting for his cue. My father cleared his throat, getting straight to the point as he always did. "Chloe, we know this is a difficult time, but in difficult times, the family needs to pull together." He paused for dramatic effect. "Your brother has an incredible business opportunity, a real game changer. But he needs a significant loan to get it off the ground, about $500,000. I just stared at the screen, my mind going numb. 500,000. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Kyle, who had never held a job for more than 6 months, who had burned through every investment my father had ever given him, now needed $500,000. My father continued, his voice taking on a tone of paternal authority. "The bank is ready to approve it, but given his track record, they require a co-signer, someone with a stable income and good credit." He looked at me expectantly. "You." It wasn't a question, it was a demand. My role in this family had always been clear. I was the safety net, the responsible one who was expected to clean up the messes of the golden child. I opened my mouth to say no, to finally draw the line I should have drawn years ago. But before I could speak, Kyle leaned into the camera, a smug, manipulative smile on his face. And he said the words that shattered everything. "Come on, Chloe," he said, his voice smooth and persuasive. "It's just a signature. You won't even notice it. Besides, think about it. This is what Arthur would have wanted you to do. He used his name. He invoked the memory of the man I was mourning, the man whose loss was still a raw, open wound in my soul, and he twisted it into a tool for his own selfish gain. He weaponized my grief. He took the purest, most supportive relationship I had ever known and defiled it, reducing Arthur's legacy to a justification for bailing out his own failures. In that moment, something inside me broke. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed frustrations, of overlooked achievements, they all coalesced into a single, blinding flash of cold, hard clarity. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a profound betrayal, a declaration that my feelings, my grief, my entire life were nothing more than resources to be exploited for their convenience. It wasn't the last straw. It was a tidal wave that washed away any last shred of hope that they would ever change, that they would ever see me. And that's when I knew it was over. All of it. At this point in the story, I honestly don't have a word for what that feels like. If you're feeling the same anger that I am right now, do me a favor. Comment with just one word that describes their actions. But instead of breaking down, that rage turned into a cold, quiet strength. The kind of strength you only find when you have absolutely nothing left to lose. For a long moment after Kyle spoke, I said nothing. I just stared at their faces on my phone screen. My mother's expectant smile, my father's impatient frown, my brother's smug confidence. They were waiting. Waiting for the familiar capitulation. Waiting for the sigh, the reluctant agreement. The responsible daughter falling back into her designated role. But this time, something different was happening behind my eyes. The screen didn't just show me their faces, it reflected my own. And for the first time, I saw a stranger looking back. A woman with empty, hollowed-out eyes. The part of me that had always craved their approval, that had held onto a desperate, foolish hope that one day they would see me. It finally died. It wasn't a loud, dramatic death. It was a quiet, cold severance, a final, silent click as a door that had been left ajar for 28 years finally swung shut and locked from the inside. There were no tears. The searing pain of their betrayal had burned away everything soft and vulnerable inside me, leaving behind something hard, sharp, and unbreakable. It was a moment of terrifying clarity, a cold realization that felt less like an epiphany and more like a diagnosis of a terminal illness I'd been ignoring for decades. They will never change. The thought wasn't angry or sad. It was a simple, immutable fact. Like gravity, or the sky being blue. Trying to win their love was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. A pointless, exhausting exercise in self-deception. I had spent my entire life performing for an audience that had never even bothered to look at the stage. The performance was over. The lights were out. It was enough. It had to be. There would be no next time. Without saying a word, I reached out and ended the FaceTime call. The screen went black, plunging my silent apartment into an even deeper quiet. I could hear their voices in my head, baffled and indignant. Did she just hang up on us? But their phantom anger felt distant, like a storm happening in another country. It couldn't touch me anymore. For years, their emotional weather had dictated my climate. Their cold fronts made me shiver. Their stormy tempers made me seek shelter. Now, I was my own ecosystem, calm, contained, and cold. I stood up from the couch, my movements deliberate and steady. There was no hesitation. I walked to the small bar cart in the corner of my living room, the one I kept stocked for guests I rarely had. I poured myself 2 fingers of a peaty, smoky scotch that Arthur had introduced me to, the kind of whiskey that burns on the way down. I needed that burn. I needed a physical sensation to match the cold fire that was now fueling me. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest, a stark contrast to the ice in my veins. The grief for Arthur was still there, a constant dull ache, but now it was mingling with something new, a resolve, a purpose. Arthur had taught me to build things. Now I was going to build a wall, an impenetrable fortress around the life I had created for myself. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. The sleek silver device hummed to life, the glowing logo of Vance Dynamics illuminating my face in the dim light. This was my world, my creation, a universe built on logic, merit, and results. A place where the rules made sense. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my actions now methodical, precise. I wasn't acting on emotion anymore. I was executing a strategy. My first email was to my corporate lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Jessica. The subject line was blunt: urgent, personal asset separation. The body of the email was just as direct. Jessica, I need to discuss the legal mechanisms for completely severing financial ties with my family of origin. This includes trusts, inheritance, and any potential future claims. Please advise on the most aggressive and definitive course of action. I am available to meet at your earliest convenience. I hit send. The sound of the outgoing mail swoosh felt like the first stone being laid in my new wall. Next, I opened a secure folder on my desktop labeled Contingency. Inside were scans of every financial document, every achievement, every press release about Vance dynamics that I had intentionally kept from my family. Quarterly reports showing exponential growth, drafts of our upcoming $900 million government contract, the Forbes 30 Under 30 feature, my personal net worth statement meticulously updated by my financial advisor, shows a valuation that was nearing $2 billion. I stared at the numbers. They felt unreal, detached from the person sitting in this modest apartment. For so long, I had seen this wealth as a complication, a secret to be guarded. Now I saw it for what it truly was: power, leverage, ammunition. As I was organizing the files, my phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from my mother. It was a picture of the grand dining room at my parents' Connecticut estate, the table perfectly set for 24 people. The caption read, "Don't forget the annual family dinner next Saturday. Can't wait to see you. We can discuss Kyle's amazing new venture then. XOXO, Mom." My first instinct was to laugh. A hollow, bitter sound. They had just tried to emotionally blackmail me using the memory of my dead mentor, and now they were acting as if nothing had happened. As if my compliance was a foregone conclusion. They expected me to show up, smile politely, and sign on the dotted line, just like I always had. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was staggering, and in that moment, my entire plan crystallized. They wanted a discussion. They wanted a performance in their arena on their terms. Fine. I would give them one. But this time, it wouldn't be their show. It would be mine. My grief had become their tool, a weakness to be exploited. Now my success would become my weapon. The secret I had guarded for so long out of a desire to be valued for who I was, not what I had, was about to be deployed. Not for validation, not to win their approval. That ship had sailed, sunk, and settled on the ocean floor. This was about something else entirely. This was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about drawing a line so bright and so clear that it would be visible from space. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I thought about all the years I had spent shrinking myself to fit into the small, cramped box they had built for me. I thought about the missed graduation, the condescending pats on the head, the casual dismissal of my life's work. I thought about Arthur's voice, telling me to remember my own worth. My fingers typed out a simple reply, 4 words that sealed their fate and started a war. I will be there. I hit send. As the message was delivered, I took another sip of my scotch. The plan was in motion. They wanted a family dinner. I would give them a reckoning. They wanted a performance. I would give them the show of a lifetime. But this time, I wasn't just the lead actress. I was the writer, the director, and the executive producer. And the final act was going to be something they would never, ever forget. The drive up to my parents' estate in Connecticut felt like a pilgrimage to a battlefield. Every winding turn of the manicured driveway, lined with perfectly sculpted topiaries, felt like a step deeper into enemy territory. I had ordered an Uber, a practical Toyota Camry, and as we pulled up the circular drive, it looked like a dinghy docking next to a fleet of yachts. I saw Kyle's new Ferrari, positioned at a cocky angle, Uncle Robert's gleaming Bentley, and a half-dozen other luxury cars that screamed old money and new arrogance. This was their arena. A sprawling Georgian mansion that had been featured in architectural magazines, a testament to the Sterling family's obsession with appearances. This was the stage they had built for my public capitulation. I stepped out of the Uber, dressed in my battle armor, dark jeans, a simple white blouse, and Arthur's watch on my wrist. It felt heavier than usual, not from its physical weight, but from the weight of the moment. I was calm. A strange, serene coldness had settled over me. The anxiety I usually felt before these gatherings was gone, replaced by a singular, sharp focus. I wasn't here to survive the evening. I was here to win the war. The moment I walked into the main salon, the performance began. My mother glided towards me, her smile perfectly polished, her eyes doing a quick, critical scan of my outfit. My father gave me a firm, businesslike hug, his mind clearly on the agenda for the evening. And Kyle? Kyle approached me with the swagger of a victorious general. The air was thick with a cloying, false sweetness. They were all playing their parts, assuming I would play mine. They thought my presence meant my surrender. They thought that after a week of the silent treatment, I had come to my senses and was ready to discuss the terms of Kyle's loan. We moved into the formal dining room, the table gleaming with crystal and silver under the light of a massive chandelier. I was strategically placed between Kyle and my mother, a lamb surrounded by wolves. The conversation started as it always did, a competitive symphony of achievements and acquisitions. Cousins droned on about their trips to Bali, their new Rolexes, their promotions at prestigious firms. I remained silent, a quiet observer, letting the tension build. Kyle, unable to contain himself any longer, finally made his move. He started by condescendingly asking about my little startup, peppering his questions with feigned concern about the risks of entrepreneurship. I gave him short, non-committal answers, my calmness seeming to agitate him. He needed a reaction. He needed to establish his dominance before the main event. That's when he played his first card. He cleared his throat, making sure he had the attention of the table. He deliberately raised his left wrist into the light, flashing a diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe that looked more like a disco ball than a timepiece. "You see, Chloe," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is what happens when you close a big deal. An image piece. It tells people you've made it without you having to say a word." His eyes flickered down to my wrist, to Arthur's simple, elegant watch. That's the difference between playing in the big leagues and, well, messing around in the minors. But hey, you keep at it. Maybe one day you'll be able to afford something that doesn't look like it was passed down from a grandfather. The insult hung in the air, sharp and ugly. My Uncle Robert chuckled in appreciation of his son's wit. I felt a surge of cold fury. He wasn't just insulting my watch. He was insulting Arthur's legacy. But I held my tongue. I simply looked at him, my expression unreadable. His little power play was just the opening act. The main event was yet to come. My father, sensing the conversation was getting off script, tried to steer it back. But his attention was snagged. His eyes, which had been dismissive just moments before, were now locked on my wrist. He leaned forward, squinting. The jovial, competitive atmosphere at the table began to curdle. My father's focus was intense, a surgeon examining a critical anomaly. "Chloe," he said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Your watch. May I see it?" The table fell silent. I extended my arm. My father examined the timepiece, his face a mask of growing disbelief. This is an Arthur Vance original," he breathed, more to himself than to anyone else. "From his first limited collection." Uncle Robert scoffed. "The tech guy? He made watches?" "Before tech, he was a horologist," my father explained, his eyes still glued to my wrist. He only ever made 50 of these. They're legendary. He finally looked up at me, his expression a cocktail of shock and a dawning, unwelcome respect. How in the world did you get this? All eyes were on me. The power dynamic at the table had tilted, just slightly. Arthur gave it to me, I said simply. He was my mentor. My father sat back, shaking his head. Chloe, do you have any idea what this is worth? He looked around the table, a strange pride warring with his confusion. This is a $2.5 million watch, possibly more at auction. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Kyle's mouth literally fell open, his diamond-studded Patek Philippe suddenly looking gaudy and pathetic. But the shock quickly morphed into suspicion. My Uncle Robert narrowed his eyes, his mind always transactional, searching for an angle. Wait a minute, David, he said, his voice laced with a slimy insinuation. Arthur Vance, a billionaire legend, and he just gives a young female employee a multi-million-dollar gift? For no reason? He let the question hang in the air, thick and poisonous. Chloe, in the business world, nothing is free. A gift like that, people might get the wrong idea about the nature of your relationship with an older, wealthy man. And there it was, the ultimate betrayal. When faced with a reality that didn't fit their narrative of me as the struggling, lesser child, they didn't question their own judgment. They questioned my integrity. They attacked my character. They dragged Arthur's memory through the mud, painting our relationship, the most honest and supportive one in my life, as something sordid and transactional. The cold calm inside me shattered, replaced by a pure, white-hot rage. Uncle Robert, I said, and my voice was so cold it could have frozen the wine in their glasses. My relationship with Arthur was one of mutual respect and intellectual mentorship. He believed in my potential. I am sorry that your mind is so small that it can only imagine one reason for a successful man to support a talented woman. My father slammed his hand on the table. Robert, that's enough. Apologize to your niece. But the damage was done. The accusation, vile and baseless, now hung over the table. This was their final move, an attempt to shame me back into submission. But they had miscalculated. They hadn't shamed me, they had liberated me. They had severed the very last thread of familial obligation that had kept me silent for all these years. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water. I looked from my uncle's sneering face to my brother's stunned expression, to my mother's worried eyes. I had their complete, undivided attention. You want to talk about business, Uncle Robert? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Let's talk about business. I turned my gaze to my father. Dad, you were worried about my little startup still being afloat. Last month, Vance Dynamics finalized a contract with the federal government to overhaul its data infrastructure. It's a 5-year deal. I paused, letting them lean in. Worth $900 million. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of my Aunt Pamela dropping her fork. And Kyle, I said, turning to my brother, whose face had gone pale. You were concerned about me playing in the minors. After our last round of funding, Vance Dynamics was valued at $1.8 billion. I retain majority ownership. I let the number land. $1.8 billion. It was an alien concept in a room where success was measured in single-digit millions. So, as for your $500,000 loan, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. The cosigner you're looking for? That's a bank, not a sister. I think it's time you learn to play in the big leagues on your own. I calmly placed my napkin on the table. I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the marble floor. Every eye was on me, a mixture of shock, horror, and dawning comprehension on their faces. Thank you for dinner, I said to the room at large. I have an early flight to Zurich in the morning. And then I turned and I walked away. I didn't run. I walked. Out of the dining room, through the grand foyer, and out the massive oak doors into the cool night air, leaving the smoking crater of their shattered reality behind me. The war was over, and I had won. The moment I slid into the back seat of the waiting Uber, my phone began to detonate. The screen lit up with a relentless barrage of incoming calls. Dad. Mom. Kyle. Uncle Robert. It was a digital assault, a desperate, chaotic attempt to pull me back into the wreckage I had just created. I looked at the glowing screen, at the names of the people who were supposed to be my foundation, my safe harbor. They felt like strangers. I calmly pressed the Do Not Disturb button, and the screen went dark. The silence in the car was beautiful. It was the sound of my own sovereignty. As the car pulled away from the ornate iron gates of the Sterling estate, I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there. Back in the dining room, as I later learned from a more sympathetic cousin, my departure had left a vacuum that was quickly filled with chaos. The initial stunned silence had apparently erupted into a pandemonium of disbelief and accusation. Kyle, my cousin, told me that, had turned on my father, his face pale and sweaty. 1.8 billion? What the hell does she mean? 1.8 billion? Dad, she's lying, right? This is some kind of sick joke. My father, meanwhile, was furiously typing on his phone, his knuckles white. The search query was simple. Vance Dynamics net worth. My cousin described the moment the search results loaded. She said a look of utter gut-wrenching shock washed over my father's face. He didn't say a word. He just slowly placed his phone face down on the table, the color draining from his face. The truth, cold and digital, had confirmed the kill. The shockwave hit them in stages. First came the disbelief. It was simply too much for their carefully constructed reality to absorb. Chloe? The quiet one? The one they pitied and patronized? A billionaire? It was impossible. It had to be a lie. A bluff. But my father's ashen face told them otherwise. And that's when the second stage hit. Panic. A raw, undiluted panic that stripped away their veneer of sophisticated wealth and exposed the frantic, grasping fear underneath. They didn't see a daughter or a niece who had achieved incredible success. They saw a resource they had just alienated. A walking, talking bank vault that had just slammed its doors shut in their faces. Kyle's $500,000 business opportunity evaporated before his eyes. My Uncle Robert's smug superiority curdled into the sour taste of a massive miscalculation. My mother's carefully planned evening, her perfect social performance, had ended in a public relations disaster. The third stage, the inevitable final act of their dysfunction, was blame. And it was all directed at me. By the time I got back to my apartment in the city, my phone had accumulated 37 missed calls and a flood of voicemails. I poured myself another glass of scotch, sat down on my couch, and, with a sense of detached curiosity, decided to listen. It was like listening to the audio diary of a complete societal collapse. My mother's voicemails were a masterclass in emotional manipulation. They started with tears, her voice choked with theatrical sobs. Chloe, darling, how could you do this to us, to your family? After everything we've done for you, we gave you everything. Everything? I thought, taking a sip of my drink. You gave Kyle everything. You gave me expectations. Her tone then shifted to guilt. You've embarrassed us in front of the entire family. You've ruined this family. This is all your fault. My fault. Of course. It was my fault for not staying in the box they had built for me. My fault for succeeding beyond their limited imaginations. My father's messages were different. They were short, clipped, and filled with a cold, impotent rage. He was a man who was used to being in control, and I had just stripped him of all of it. Chloe, this is your father, the first one began, as if I wouldn't recognize his voice. This behavior is unacceptable. You will call me back immediately to discuss this outrageous stunt. Stunt. He thought my life's work was a stunt. The second message was even more telling. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it ends now. You have responsibilities to this family. You will not turn your back on us. The word responsibilities hung in the air. He didn't mean love or loyalty. He meant financial obligation. I was no longer a daughter. I was a hostile asset. And then, there was Kyle. His voicemails were a chaotic symphony of desperation and entitlement. The first one was pure, unadulterated rage. You bitch, it started. You think you're so smart with your little secret? You just couldn't stand to see me succeed. You've been planning this all along, haven't you? To humiliate me. The victim complex was so ingrained, he couldn't even process the reality of the situation. In his mind, my success wasn't the result of my hard work. It was a calculated attack on him. The next message, left just minutes later, was a complete tonal shift. The rage was gone, replaced by a pathetic, wheedling plea. Okay, Chloe, listen. I'm sorry, all right? I was out of line. We can work this out. 500,000, that's nothing to you now, right? It's like a rounding error. Just help me out. Please. We're family. The whiplash was nauseating. He saw no contradiction between calling me a bitch and begging for my money in the same breath. Because to him, I wasn't a person. I was a function. An ATM that had suddenly started demanding a password. I listened to them all, one by one, and with each message the walls of my fortress grew higher, the stones setting more firmly in place. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, quiet emptiness. The family I had spent my life trying to please didn't exist. They were ghosts, projections of a fantasy I had stubbornly clung to. The people on the other end of these voicemails were strangers. Strangers united by a shared sense of entitlement and a complete inability to see me as anything other than an extension of their own needs. I deleted the voicemails, all of them. I cleared the call log. I wiped the slate clean. It was time to build a new life with a new family, a family of my own choosing. The apathetic calm I felt after deleting their voicemails lasted through the night. But the next morning, the reality of what I had done began to set in. Severing ties with your family isn't like ripping off a Band-Aid. It's like a surgical amputation. Even when it's necessary to save your own life, it leaves a phantom limb that aches with the memory of what used to be there. As I was making coffee, my phone rang. It was my father. For a split second, the old, conditioned reflex kicked in. The urge to answer, to smooth things over, to manage his emotions. But then I looked at the watch on my wrist. Arthur's watch. A reminder of my own worth. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. He called 3 more times, back to back. Then came a text. Chloe, I am your father. You will answer my call. It wasn't a request. It was a command from a king who had just discovered his throne was on fire. I knew this was a critical moment. If I engaged, if I argued, I would be dragged right back into their toxic orbit. The only way to win was not to play. But then, he called again. And this time, I knew I had to answer. Not to negotiate, but to declare. To make a statement so unambiguous that there would be no room for misinterpretation. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and swiped to accept the call. What? I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the emotion he was expecting. What? He sputtered, taken aback by my tone. Is that any way to speak to your father? After the scene you caused last night, you owe us an explanation. No, I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. I don't owe you anything. An explanation. My time, my money, nothing. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Chloe, you are being hysterical. He finally managed, falling back on his favorite dismissal. You are part of this family, and you will. I cut him off. No, Dad, I'm not. Not anymore. I'm done. I paused, letting the finality of the words sink in. This is the last time we will be speaking directly. From this point forward, any and all communication regarding financial matters, family trusts, or anything else will go through my lawyer, Jessica Dean. Her office will be in touch with you shortly to begin the process of formal separation. Separation? He echoed, his voice a mixture of fury and disbelief. What the hell are you talking about? You can't separate from your family. Watch me, I said. I am no longer responsible for your problems, your emotions, or Kyle's catastrophic life choices. My life is my own. The safety net is gone. Do not call me again. And then, for the second time in less than 24 hours, I hung up on him. Immediately after, I went into my contacts and blocked his number. Then my mother's, then Kyle's, then my Uncle Robert's. One by one, I digitally erased them from my life. It was a brutal, painful process. But with each block, I felt a weight lifting. A chain that had been wrapped around me since birth was finally breaking, link by painful link. For the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. I was choosing myself over their approval. This was a monumental moment. If you support this powerful decision, drop a flexed bicep emoji in the comments to send her some strength on this journey. That quiet support, even just knowing that others understood, was exactly what I needed to start rebuilding. The days that followed were strange. The silence from my family was deafening at first, a void where there had always been noise and drama. But slowly, other voices began to fill that space. Quieter voices, kinder voices, the voices of my chosen family. When I walked into the Vance Dynamics office on Monday morning, I was half expecting whispers or strange looks. News from the Sterling family dinner had likely trickled out through the cousin grapevine, but my team, my real family, didn't mention it. My CTO, a brilliant programmer named Ben, just quietly placed my favorite coffee order on my desk as I sat down. My head of marketing, Sarah, poked her head in and said, "Hey, that new algorithm test you designed over the weekend? It's genius. Pure genius." They didn't offer pity. They offered normalcy. They offered respect. They saw me not as a billionaire heiress in the middle of a family drama, but as Chloe, their leader, their colleague, their friend. Their quiet, unwavering support was a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still bleeding. That afternoon, I had a scheduled mentorship call with Maya, the 16-year-old prodigy from our foundation. She was a brilliant girl from an under-resourced community, designing an app to help low-income families find affordable, healthy food. Her passion and drive reminded me so much of myself at that age, before the world had tried to dim my light. She was excitedly telling me about a breakthrough she'd had with her code. Her face was lit up with the pure, unadulterated joy of creation. At the end of the call, she looked at me through the screen, her expression suddenly serious. "You know, Chloe," she said, "my guidance counselor told me that girls like me don't get to run tech companies. Thanks to you." I know she's wrong. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. In that moment, I understood the true meaning of legacy. It wasn't about the money or the valuation or the name on the building. It was about this. About using your power to empower others. About creating opportunities. About being the person for someone else that Arthur had been for me. My biological family had tried to use my success as a resource for their own gain, but my chosen family, my team, and mentees like Maya, they were showing me what success was really for. It was for building a better world, one line of code, one empowered young woman at a time. I was finally starting to understand what Arthur meant. True wealth isn't what you have, it's what you give. And I was just getting started. 2 years have passed since that final explosive dinner. The changes in my life have been seismic, yet incredibly quiet. Vance Dynamics had a wildly successful IPO last year. I moved out of my modest one-bedroom apartment and into a penthouse overlooking Central Park. It's a beautiful space, with clean lines and minimalist furniture, filled with light. But the best part about it isn't the view or the square footage. It's the silence, the peace. It's a home I built, a sanctuary that is entirely my own, free from the echoes of past resentments and unmet expectations. My life is full, but it's full of things I've chosen: challenging work, meaningful philanthropy, and the quiet, unwavering support of my chosen family. The fallout for the Sterlings was, from what I've heard, swift and brutal. My legal team, led by Jessica, was methodical and merciless. Every financial tie was severed. Every loophole was closed. Without my implicit financial backing, the house of cards my father had built on a foundation of leverage and reputation began to crumble. They had to sell the estate in Connecticut. My mother, stripped of her primary stage for social performance, retreated from the charity circuit. My father, facing a reality he could no longer control, took an early retirement. His empire, it turned out, was more fragile than he had ever let on. And Kyle was hit the hardest. The bank, of course, rejected his loan application without my signature. His game-changing business idea, like all the ones before it, dissolved into nothing. With no trust fund to fall back on and no sister to bail him out, he was finally forced to face the one thing he had spent his entire life avoiding: reality. The last I heard, he was working as a sales associate at a high-end electronics store. For the first time in his life, he had to earn his own paycheck. He had to answer to a boss. He was, in short, being forced to grow up. For nearly 2 years, I had no contact with them. It was a clean break. Then, about a month ago, a handwritten letter arrived at my office. It was from Kyle. I almost threw it away, but my curiosity got the better of me. The letter wasn't what I expected. There were no excuses, no blame, no hidden requests for money. It was just an apology. A raw, honest, and deeply humbling admission of his own arrogance, his jealousy, and his profound regret for how he had treated me his entire life. He wrote about the humiliation of his first few months at his job, about the dawning realization of just how much he had taken for granted. He wrote that losing my respect was the wake-up call he never knew he needed. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just said he hoped that one day he could become a man worthy of being my brother. I agreed to meet him. We met at a neutral, anonymous coffee shop downtown. The man who sat across from me was not the smug, entitled prince I had grown up with. He was quieter, more thoughtful. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by a weary sort of wisdom. He told me about his struggles, his small victories at his job, and his plans to maybe go back to school, this time for something he was actually interested in. He apologized again, in person, without any agenda. I listened, and for the first time I saw him not as my tormentor, but as a flawed human being who was finally, painfully trying to find his own way. I accepted his apology. The relationship will never be what it once was. The trust, once shattered, can't be perfectly glued back together. But we established a new foundation, one built on honesty and mutual respect, with clear, unshakable boundaries that I now control. Looking back, that explosive dinner wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. It was the moment I stopped waiting for a seat at their table and decided to build my own. They say you can't choose your family, and maybe that's true when it comes to blood. But you can, and you must, choose your tribe. You can choose to surround yourself with people who see your worth, who celebrate your strength, and who respect your boundaries. Financial independence was my tool, but the real freedom came from emotional independence. The moment I realized my self-worth wasn't tied to their approval, I became truly invincible. Sometimes, the most powerful act of self-love isn't holding on tighter. It's having the courage to finally let go. This journey has taught me so much. But now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with a family member who just didn't respect you? How did you navigate that painful but necessary conversation? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience could be the validation someone else needs to hear. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your power and building a life on your own terms. Thank you for listening.